Ruchem Aboyim, M'Shem Irgin Shir Therapies, Boston. I'd like to welcome everyone to tonight's shir, all the men here in the main shul, all the women upstairs and downstairs, everyone listening on the phone, and everyone joining in through the live streaming. Ruchem Aboyim to everyone. Tonight we have the cover tab with us once again, Rabbi Mordechai Becher, Senior Lecturer, Gateway Seminar, discuss alternative therapies and Halacha. Rabbi say whoever didn't yet take part in the annual dinner by giving that donation can still do so. Call Irgun Shiri Torah 718-851-8651 or email tapecenter@yeshivanet.com, or if you're watching on the live stream you can click on the donate button on the left side of the screen. It's my cover to call on Rabbi Becher for tonight's drasha.
Thank you. Actually, I'm just going to move this a little bit so this is not okay. Right. Okay. So, first of all, before we start, I should point out that obviously one should consult one's posek on all matters of halacha. This shir is not supposed to be a psak halacha for anyone. It's rather lahagdil Torah lahadira, and to discuss some of the sugyas. And obviously, healing sickness is an area in which people, it's very emotional. There's obviously desperation, panic, stress, and all these things make it harder to make decisions and to make rational decisions. So what we're discussing is a whole range. When we talk about alternative therapies, there is a very wide spectrum of what is meant by alternative therapies. So on the simplest level, it may be like something like healthy diet, which is type of obvious. Exercise, okay. On the other end of the spectrum, there are all types of activities which do not seem, according to Seichel Hayasha, according to simple logic, to have anything to do with the disease or with healing of it. An example of that would be dowsing. People use rods to and pretend that it points to the area of the body where the problem is. Witch doctors do this in South Africa. Very common. Aboriginal witch doctors do this as well. There are also, of course, people who believe that, for example, you put a magnet on your head or on your wrist is going to do something. The magnetic field is almost completely insignificant, not going to do anything, makes no sense logically. And in between, there's a whole range of alternative therapies and alternative treatments. Now, people are often drawn into them by testimonials. So-and-so told me that it worked. Now, if you do something based on a testimonial, anecdotal evidence that someone told you that it worked, then, people do that about Christianity and Buddhism and Hinduism and every single avodah zarah and magic in the world. There is nothing that lacks testimonials. So it's really difficult to base something on someone telling you, but it worked for me. Okay. Also, I should point out, there's a very interesting Gemara in Avodah Zarah. It's primarily a Mishnah. It's a very long Mishnah, but there's also a Gemara attached, as you might expect, in which the philosophers asked the Zakanim, Roman wise people asked the Zakanim. We know that Tanoim used to go to Rome and to lobby tax releases, etc. So they used to go to Rome. So the philosophers asked them in Rome, if HaKadosh Baruch Hu doesn't like Avodah Zarah, if your God, they say, doesn't like Avodah Zarah, why doesn't he just wipe it out? Why doesn't he get rid of it? So they said, well, if the Ovdei Avodah Zarah would be worshipping things that the world has no need for, then that would be fine. Wouldn't be a problem. Problem is, They worship the sun, as we saw yesterday. Right? They worship the moon. They worship the stars. They worship things which the world requires in order to exist. So if HaKadosh Baruch Hu is mevatel those, that's it. Goodbye to the planet. You can say goodbye to existence. So the philosopher says, so fine. So he could be mevatel, let him destroy things the world doesn't need, that they worship, and leave those things that they do worship. So Chachamim said, yeah, but that would now give credence and evidence for the things that they worship. Because they'd say, look at that. That thing got destroyed, and this thing still exists. So obviously it has some type of power. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu, rather, in the end it says, Olam kiminhagoi noheg. Hashem lets the world run according to nature, and the fools who choose to make a mistake, they'll make a mistake. And then the Gemara discusses the following. It says there are cases, a person is sick, and he goes to a house of Avodah Zarah. He goes to this place of Avodah Zarah, and he is healed. He's healed. So how does that work? So the Gemara there says, I won't go through the whole mashal the Gemara gives, but the Gemara basically says the following. If the disease was meant to end after 7 days, if for whatever reason, either because of his chus, or because of the natural course of events, or his tefillah, or whatever reason it is, the disease was meant to end at 7 days, and it so happens that on the 7th day he visits the Avodah Zarah. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is not going to change the nature of that disease. He's not going to change the teva shel olam because of this fool who's going to attribute it to Avodah Zarah. So therefore, the fact that something works, the fact that this person apparently was healed, Chazal say that's not a proof of anything. If it was a proof of something, you would say it's a proof for Avodah Zarah. So that's the first point that we have to understand. Secondly, people often point to things as being ancient. If it's an ancient cure. You ever heard that one? Ancient wisdom, it's an ancient cure. You know what? One of the most ancient things in the world is Avodah Zarah. That doesn't make it correct. The fact that something is old just means it's old. Doesn't mean it's more correct. Doesn't mean it's less correct. There are old things which are right. There are old things which are wrong. Ancient wisdom does not automatically mean a thing. Number three. I'll get to questions later. Number 3. People will say something like this. I understand but I'll get to it later. Right? People will say, but it's natural. To which we would respond, so is arsenic, poison ivy, uranium, hurricanes, sharks, poison spiders, snakes, they're all natural. This doesn't automatically, the fact that something's natural doesn't mean automatically it's fantastic. Right? There are natural things which are great, like aspirin. There are natural things which are not good. So the fact that it's natural, meaningless. Again, I just wanted to point out some of the things to be wary of in terms, because people are desperate, and because there's the pressure, and because of the sickness, and so on and so forth, people are more likely to accept things which they otherwise would not accept. Okay, now, to get to the meat of the idea, first of all, as we know, from the Pasuk says that V'rapo Yerapeh, that one man hurts another man, says V'rapo Yerapeh shall heal him. And Rabbi Yishmael says, Mikan shenitna reshus l'roifel l'rapos. We see here permission has been given for the physician to heal. Some, as the Ramban points out, it's a reshus mitzvah, meaning it's an obligation to heal. We know that the obligation to heal comes from a number of sources. First of all, v'chai behem, and also from Lo Samad al Dam Reyecha, don't stand idly by the blood of your friend. Also we know Hashavas Aveda, the Gemara says, if you're mechuyev, if you are chayev to return something like someone's property, like their shor, seh, etc., chamor, then kol shekain, you're chayev to restore to them their body. What does Hashavas Aveda do for? What does it mean they lose their body? They might lose the use of a limb. They might lose their health. So the chiyuv of Hashavas Aveda involves restoration of someone's facilities, someone's faculties, someone's limbs, someone's senses, and someone's health. And all that is part of the chiyuv. It is true the Ramban and some Rishonim say that someone who is on the highest level of bitachon, someone who is a tzaddik atzum like Reb Chanina ben Doisa, does not need doctors, but the Noisei Kalim and Shulchan Aruch point out that it is unlikely in the extreme that there's anyone today who qualifies for that status where the Ramban would say, you don't need a doctor because you are just, your bitachon is just awesome, right? That doesn't seem to be likely. For a person to consider themselves that way is, I think, probably arrogant. So the Shulchan Aruch, however, when it talks about reshus l'roifer, when it says permission has been given to the roifer, Shulchan Aruch in Yoredeya, Shin Lamed Vav, says the following: Miu lo yisasik berafua, elim kain hu boki. A person should not engage in healing unless he is an expert. V'lo yehei sham gadol mimenu, and there is no greater expert there than him. Shim lo kain, harei zeh shoifech damim. It's a serious issue here. The person who is not aware, has not studied, let's say, biology, chemistry, anatomy, he's taken an online course in I don't know, idiotherapy, etc. And he feels that he's now Baki and he's willing to disagree. That's a serious problem. Right? That is shoifech damim. V'im ripa shaloi b'reshus beistin chayev b'tashlumim, as opposed to a doctor who heals with permission because he's an expert. He has permission from the beistin. So such a person, if he makes a mistake, if he hurts, he's not chayev in tashlumim. But this person, who's not b'reshus beistin, must pay. So it's a serious issue. So one issue when we are talking about is, of course, shvichus damim, and as the Mishnah Berurah, as a friend of mine pointed out, the Mishnah Berurah often will say, Yirei Shemaim Yachmir al Atzmoi. So, that's true. It's a good thing to be machmir, but if there's something you would like to be machmir in, I would suggest two pretty central issues. Number one is sakonas hafashos, and number two we're going to get to is avodah zarah. Avodah zarah couldn't be more central than avodah zarah. Gemara Megillah says, Kol ha-koifer ba'avodah, kol ha-koifer ba'avodah zarah, k'moide b'kol ha-torah kula, kol ha-moide b'torah k'koifer ba'avodah zarah. If you admit to the power, the strength, the existence, the reality of avodah zarah, that's considered kfira, a denial of the entire Torah. That's serious. So if there's an area would you like to be machmir in, probably a good area to be machmir in. I recently was in Vietnam and Thailand, leading a tour of Vietnam and Thailand, all the sacred Jewish sites there. Whatever. Anyway, but people who go to these areas will often visit Cambodia, and in Cambodia there's a very famous temple of idolatry called Angkor Wat. It's one of the oldest temples in the world, dates back I think over 1,000 years. And I did a little research, because I heard that there were tour groups who went there. I did a little research. I found out, first of all, it's still used. So it's not abandoned. There are still Buddhist ceremonies that take place in Angkor Wat, number one. Number two, Mishnah in Avodah Zarah says, Avodah Zarah shehinuacha hinichua of Deya b'shas shalom muteres b'shas muchama asura. If the Ovdei Avodah Zarah, if the idolaters abandon their temple at a time of peace, that's considered to be a bitul Avodah Zarah, an annulment of the Avodah Zarah, and it's mutter, it's permitted for me to now get benefit from it. But if they left it, abandoned it at a time of war, since their abandonment was reluctant, was not willing, so consequently it's not considered to be a bitul, as not an annulment, and therefore it'd be prohibited. So that was my research. I asked Rav Hershel Schachter, and he confirmed that this was accurate and that it was also, but he gave me a look like, why on earth would a Yid want to go to a mokum of Avodah Zarah, even if it is abandoned, even if they're not using it, if it was like, he thought I was crazy, right? Which he may be correct. But again, if we want to be machmir on something, that's an area to be machmir on. Avraham Avinu, right? That's something which is very central. So, and of course, as we know, the Gemara says, b'chol misrapim, with anything you can be cured, meaning, if a person is in danger and they need to eat something treif, if a person needs to eat treif food that is freshly cooked on Yom Kippur that's chal on Shabbos, the doctor says you need the freshly roasted suckling pig that is roasted fresh, has to be mamish fresh, right, etc. Apple in the mouth, the whole works. And it's Yom Kippur falls out. So al pi halacha, pikuach nefesh is doiche. Pikuach nefesh pushes aside Shabbos and Yom Kippur and tumas machalos and treifus. However, b'chol misrabim chutz ma'avoda zora gilei arayis shvichas dam. We know that avodah zara is so chamor. It is one of the three averos that a person must die rather than cure himself using something which is avodah zara. So that is something to keep in mind. The origins of some therapies, some alternative therapies, the origins involve avodah zara. Some of them involve darkei ha'emora, which is a less serious. It's not as chamor, it's not as stringent as avodah zara, and consequently it can be used in certain cases. But that's something to keep in mind when we're talking about these issues. The Rambam, in a beautiful letter to Marseille, to the Chachamim in Marseille, he writes that a person should only believe in something with three reasons. Ein roi la'adam lahamin, ela be'echad mishloisha dvarim. You should only believe something if one of three cases. A, harishon, something where there is clear logical evidence for. Example would be mathematics, geometry, etc., astronomy. So you can predict to the second and so on and so forth. Number one. Number two, asheni or secondly, something which you can perceive with your senses. A third, shlishi, davashi kabel oisa ha'adam min anavim aleim hashalom uminat tzadikim. And the third is something we have from Masorah, from a tradition, from the Nevi'im aleim hashalom, from the tzadikim, from the Torah. So those are the three things. Anything else he says, if he says that we would say about the person pesi yamin l'chol davar, the fool believes everything. If the advertisement is nice enough, good graphics, he believes it. If there's a testimonial, he believes it. Pesi yamin l'chol davar. There's a beautiful tshuva of the Rashba. There was a person who claimed to be the Mashiach. Many people claim to be Mashiach. I'm not going to do that tonight. They asked me not, But anyway, but people have claimed to be the Mashiach in past. There was a fellow in Sicily who claimed to be the Mashiach. He was in Palermo, Sicily. And so people from Sicily wrote to the Rashba. What do you think? So the Rashba condemns him in very, very strong language. And then there was a phenomenon. Apparently, there were people at the time of the Rashba who were claiming nevuah. People were claiming all types of visions. There were people rising up who were claiming to have nevuah visions that this was imminent, this was about to happen, etc. So the Rashba writes a lengthy tshuva. I won't go through the whole thing, but I want to just. The last paragraph of it is very, very interesting how he puts it. He says the following: Yisrael noichle das ha'emes. Yisrael, the Jews, who are inheritors of the religion of truth. Bnei Yaakov ish emes, the children of Yaakov, the man of truth. Kuloi zera emes, people who are the children of truth. Noach lehem lizbol ol galus, they are happy to accept upon themselves the yoke of exile. Umashiagiam, and what happens to them in this exile? Mehamin bedavar, from believing something which is not true. He says, Ad sheyechkeru chakira rabba, chakira achar chakira, until the Jews investigate it with great investigation, one test after another, lahasir kol sigma advarim hane'emorim lahem, to remove all types of flaws from that which is said to them. He says, afilu mashiyir lahem shu oisu moifes, even something which you see that appears to be a miracle or a wonder. He says, we see that ha'avas ha'am Avram derech ha'emes, the love of the people of Avraham who are following the way of truth, they were even not prepared to believe in Moshe Rabbeinu until they had the absolute evidence of Har Sinai. So he says, V'zeh ois emes al ameinu am Hashem, and this is a sign of the truth of our nation, the people of Hashem, shelo lehispatois bedavar, not to be seduced by things, ad omdam al ha'emes bechakira rabba chakira gemura. That's a very powerful statement of the Rashba, that one of the signs, one of the seals, one of the indicators of Klal Yisrael is we are noichle dasa emes, children of Yaakov ish emes, kuloi zera emes, that we are not supposed to accept things just like that. Chakira, achar chakira, to investigate, to look into it, that it should make sense, that it shouldn't be just based on something very, very flimsy, pieces of evidence, etc. And the Rambam, of course, says a similar thing. Now, al pi halacha, there are a few issues that are involved here. Number one, there's obviously a chiyuv for the roife, l'rapois. There's a chiyuv for the doctor to heal. As I said, because of Rappa Yerapeh, according to those who say it's a Shusta Mitzvah, and because of V'chai Behem, Lo Yisar Dam Recha, Hashavas Aveda, all the various chiyuvim and obligations. And similarly, there is a chiyuv on the patient to seek medical attention, and not to rely on miracles. We say that is it's also to rely on a nace, and so therefore the question is, if one is involved in a therapy which is not based on evidence, which is not based on logic, then are you fulfilling that mitzvah? Is the physician fulfilling this mitzvah? Is the patient fulfilling mitzvah? It's a good question, and it's not clear. We'll talk about that. Secondly, there are various isurim, which, as I pointed out, especially if it's danger to life, where we are allowed and obligated to be to eat non-kosher. Chilul Shabbos is allowed for various for an illness which is safek nefashos, etc. So, question is also, and we'll just point to a makor about that. Does that apply to something which is not a refuah according to nature? So let's have a look. First of all, one source is a very famous Mishnah in Yuma, which talks about someone feeding someone when on Yom Kippur they're sick, or they seem to be close to fainting, etc. You can feed them. So if we feel that it's a sakana, it's a danger for them to fast, you can feed them even if the only food available is not kosher food. Ad shi'uru einav, till their eyes light up, etc. Then it says misha nashchoi kelev shoite, a person who was bit by a kelev shoite is not a stupid dog. It's a rabid dog. It's not no question about the IQ of the dog, right? But it's a rabid. I don't want to offend any dog owners, but it's a rabid dog, which is of course quite dangerous to be bitten by a rabid dog. You're not allowed to feed the person from a part of the liver of that dog. They believed at the time that you could cure a person who was bitten by a rabid dog by feeding the person the liver, part of the liver of that dog. So Rav Matya ben Cheresh said that's okay. Obviously the liver of a dog is not kosher, clearly. Right? Okay. Then, so now I just want to point out the Chachamim disagree. And the Rambam says in Pirush Mishnayos, and it's a very famous Pirush Mishnayos here, he says, Ein halacha k'Rab Matya ben Cheresh shehitzi lahachil as'adam yom Tzom Kippur yaseres kaved shel kelev shoite im nasha. We do not paskin like Rab Matya ben Cheresh, who permits feeding someone a piece of the liver of the rabid dog on Yom Kippur if he was bitten. Why? The Rambam says, Mipnei she'eina mo'il eila b'derech segula. It only helps through now, segula is a hard thing to translate, but I would say what it means is a supernatural or a non-natural cure. Okay. So, for example, if a person, chas v'sholom, breaks an arm, breaks a bone, so setting the bone, resetting the bone, and putting it in the correct place, and stabilizing it, that makes sense, it's logical, it's a skula. But on the other hand, taking a bone and holding it over his bone and putting it together, right, and saying, now it's fine, right, that's type of what we might call segula. Okay. V'chachamim oimrim, ein oivrim al mitzvah ele beripui bilvad, shu davar borur. Chachamim hold, this is how we paskin, that you can only be matir and isser, you can only permit something which is prohibited when the refuah is davar borusha hegayon v'nisayon hapashut mechayvin oisoi. He mentions two things, machloikas achroinim, whether I think it's the Tiferes Yisrael and the Birkei Yosef, but does he mean you require both? And he said two things, higayon and nisayon. Higayon means what? Logic. Nisayon, experimental or statistical evidence. Now, there are certain things where we have statistical evidence that it works, but we don't quite understand the mechanism. And there are some things where it makes sense that it should work, but we might not have sufficient statistical evidence as yet. He says when it's a refuah seguli, he says it appears to require both nisayon, hegayon, logic, and nisayon, experimental or statistical evidence. So the machloek is whether it requires both or not. Moreh Nevuchim seems to say only one or the other, and the Meiri says either one or the other. But again, what we see from the Rambam, and he says this in Pirush Mishnayos, he also says this in Moreh Nevuchim, is that there's a requirement that there should be both higayon and nisayon. The Rashba, in another tshuva, different tshuva, disagrees with the Rambam. Well, he does it very respectfully, but he disagrees with the Rambam, and he says there are things that higayon. Who's higayon? He says we don't understand everything, and he says there are things that happen in nature which we don't quite understand. Even a great scientist doesn't understand everything in nature. Physicians don't understand every single thing that happens, every disease and cure, etc. So he says it would be sufficient, according to the Rashba, if there is sufficient statistical evidence, even if it doesn't make sense to me. And a friend of mine told me that he knows of, he's a physician, I don't know much about it, but he tells me that there are drugs in which the statistical evidence that it works, but the mechanism is not quite known. We don't understand how, but we know that it does work. So that would be something which the Rambam, at least, and the Meiri and others say that and also my Rama Rottenberg, he says, "Im a refuah yedua," right? Only a refuah yedua is it allowed to be matir and isser. Are you allowed to permit an isser, like eating the non-kosher food, if it's sakana or so on and so forth? And it appears, at least from his tshuva, that he has the same definition as the Rambam. What is a refuah yedua? There has to be logic behind it. It has to make sense. And now, what's logic? What does it mean, making sense? So here, it's not so simple to define that. It's hard to define that. But I think we have certain well-established understanding of various aspects of nature of the world. And when someone tells me something which goes against that, just for example, when you dilute something. If you dilute something and dilute it and dilute it and dilute it and dilute it, so as we probably know, what happens to the original substance? Disappears. Right? So that means if you tell me that when you dilute something to the extent that the original substance is no longer there and yet it will still be effective, I've got to question whether that's higayon. That's not logical. It's not logical. Doesn't make sense. I have seen someone swallow an entire bottle of sleeping pills. I've seen him do it a few times. Yes, but the sleeping pills are homeopathic sleeping pills. Meaning, whatever substance was supposed to be there has been diluted to the extent that there's nothing in those pills, except for some, I guess, flour and sugar and stuff like that. So on the bottle it says, don't take more than necessary, etc. I'm not suggesting that anyone does this, right? Don't try this at home, but I've seen someone do, right? Yeah. So there's nothing in the original. So it has got to be higayon. So you'll tell me, but what about what's nisayon? So nisayon means there has to be some type of, we have, Baruch Hashem, developed methodologies in the medical and scientific world of investigating cures and investigating diseases and figuring out whether it actually works. They have double-blind studies, randomized studies, etc. You have control groups. You have try to eliminate the placebo effect, which, by the way, I should point out, there is such a thing as the placebo effect. The psychosomatic, psycho means of the mind, soma is Greek for the body, the mind, psychosomatic, the mind affecting the body, and that's something which is true, right? So we can't disregard that, because that's the important thing. The Rambam, in fact, says, of course, the famous Gro, who disagrees with him here, but the Shulchan Aruch says that someone who was bitten by a scorpion, you're allowed to say an incantation even on Shabbos, even though refuah is normally not allowed on Shabbos. And this is what the Shulchan Aruch says: even though this doesn't help at all, since this person is in danger, they permitted it so that he doesn't get panicked, and of course panic and concern will make his sickness worse. So and the Rambam indeed says that there are many things that we allow, there are Yisurim we allow, because a person who is in a state of danger, for example, poskim say, let's say doctor comes into someone's hospital room, in a hospital where they keep halal, there's Shaarei Tzedek, and there's a special light which you can just open the shutter on it. You don't have to turn off electricity. He opens it, and the patient says, "Turn on the light. Turn on the light." Doctor says, "I don't need it. I can examine you. I have sufficient light with what's here." And the patient, who is in sakana, in danger, insists that the doctor turn on the light. So Rav Neuvert, based on Pesach Rav Shlomo Zalman, says you're allowed to turn on, the doctor's allowed to turn on the other light, even though the doctor doesn't need it. Why? The Yishuv Hadas, meaning the calmness and the mental state of the patient, is extremely important. And the mental state of the patient could be a life and death issue. And so consequently, that's something to take into account as well. So even though there are many of these alternative medicines are completely meaningless from a physical, scientific perspective, they're not actually doing anything. You're drinking water, which is wonderful. Water is very healthy but it's not actually going to cure you necessarily, right? It will cure you of dehydration, guaranteed, right? But again, it's nevertheless might be okay liyashev daito because of the psychosomatic effect. So that's something to take into account. Another point, which I think is important to make, is the following: there are those who believe that if we can find, let's say you've got an alternative medicine, and they find some type of evidence for a belief in that in the Gemara, in Chazal, so they will automatically say, therefore, it must be okay. Right? Here, if Chazal believed in X, Y, or Z, and they said this is a cure, and now a contemporary, I put in huge quotation marks, doctor, says that this will work, right? And so there is a tendency to believe, well, if I can find this, some mention of it, even however tenuous in Chazal, then maybe it should be okay. So here I should point out a couple of things. Number one, Tosfos in Moed Cotton says that refuah shebashas einam toivos shema nishtanu k'moy harefuah shebashas she'einam toivos bizman hazeh. Tosfos first of all points out that the refuahs, the medical advice and cures mentioned in the Gemara are not effective nowadays. So Tosfos, I'm not sure which Baal Tosfos wrote this, is Tosfos Tuch, so we're talking about 13th century. 13th century France was not effective then. What's to make you think it should be effective today? Well, if Tosfos said that in his time was not effective, the refuahs and Chazal were not effective, so why would you think that now it is? Number one. Number two, the Gaonim, in the Oitzar Gaonim, it's a tshuva from Rav Shrira Gaon. Rav Shrira Gaon writes the following. It's quite famous. Tzrichin anu l'meimer l'choin. I have to tell you the following. The Rabbanon lav asusa inun. The Rabbanon were not doctors. Umilin ba'alma de chazina bizmaneon, and from things that they observed in their times, of the doctors in their times, kechad chad ketzira amrunan, they collected them together and they conveyed it to people, which is quite responsible. If a Rav tells you, here's, I heard, doctor said that you should exercise, and he tells his shul to exercise, is he doing the right thing? Of course. Right? That is the medical opinion of the time. He says, V'lav divrei mitzvah inun. when Chazal give you a medical advice or a cure, it's not a dvar mitzvah. Hilkach lo tismechun al ilan asusa. You should not rely on those medications. So, first of all, we have a Tosfos who says that the refuahs of Chazal don't work in his times because of the idea of nature or people have changed, etc. Secondly, we have the Rav Shrirgon, who maintains that when Chazal made a medical statement, the Meiri also says this, that when Chazal made a medical statement, they were basing it on the medicine of their times. They were not saying it as a dvar mitzvah, and hence he says not to rely on it. Third, Yamshel Shloima in Chulin says quite, and so this is brought from the Maharil, Rabbi Kiva Eger, in Yoredeya and the Yamshel Shloim and Chulim both say there's a cherem hakadmoinim, a cherem, a ban of excommunication that dates back probably to the time of the Geonim, not, I'll put it how he puts it, Kolar Amar Lanu Maharil, Kolar Afuas Shebechol Talmud Osur Lanasois Oisam. The cures in the Gemara, it is prohibited to use them, to try them. Mishum de'ein adam yachol lamod al ikram, because a person doesn't know the precise meaning. As we don't know the quantities, we don't necessarily know the meaning of what the substance is that they're talking about. We don't necessarily know how to administer these things. So because we don't have that clarity, he says, Chilo yalu biyadam, if they use it and it doesn't work, yilagu v'yilaglagu al divrei chachamim, they will make fun of and make light of the words of the sages. And to quote the Yamshel Shloima, he says there is a cherem hakadmoinim she'ein lismoich al refuah hatalmud. There is a ban of excommunication, not to rely on the refuah, on the healing medication of the Gemara, kadei shelo lohoitzi laz al chachamim hakoimin. So, we now have to take this to our situation, to what does this say about alternative medicine. So finding a source for an alternative therapy in Chazal is not really a good way of proving or of telling me that you should do that and you're allowed to do that. Right? According to Tosfos, Nishtanu Ateva, and they don't work anymore. According to the Geonim, it anyway was the medicine of the 6th century Babylon, which not necessarily is that medicine which we would agree with today. And Chazal were being responsible. They were following the medicine of their time. And he says they're lavasusoninhu, they're not doctors. Third, we have the Rabbi Akiva Eger and the Yamshel Shloima, the Maharil, who say there's a cherem, a ban on using these refuahs. So I would say that methodology, and the Lev Avraham, very famous sefer on halachic issues in medicine, he summarizes them and he says, Asur mikama sibois l'nasas arfuas betalmud. It is prohibited for a number of reasons to try the cures in the Gemara, and he mentions that, and he mentions all the above sources that I pointed out. So, and the Tzitz Eliezer of Eliezer Huda Waldenberg, who was a great posek in Israel, he became one of the great experts in medical ethics. One of the reasons was, it's amazing, how the role that, the real estate agents say location, location, location. So he used to live in a neighborhood of Yerushalayim just off Rehov Yafo, near the old Sharei Tzedek Hospital, is now in Beit Vegan. But it used to be just off Rehov Yafo, the old Sharei Tzedek building, right? So which is now, I think, a television studio or something like that. Anyway, right? So now they're causing sickness instead of healing. Anyway, but the old Sharei Tzedek building. So Rabbi Eliezer Yehuda Waldenberg used to live near there, and they had a base medrash attached to the hospital. There was a shul in the hospital. He used to go there. I remember I used to go occasionally and ask him shaylas in the shul attached to the old Sharei Tzedek when I was in Israel last century. So. I know it's hard to believe, but yeah. Anyway, so I used to go and ask. So what happened was doctors would come in. Here's a great Talmud Chacham sitting in a shul in the hospital. They're asking shaylas. So he had this amazing amount of shimush in real life from physicians in the hospital who would ask him questions time after time after time. So he has produced thousands of tshuvas regarding these issues of medical ethics, etc. And one of the things he points out, again, he also paskins that refuas and skulois shehuskuru b'Talmud. He also mentions the Tosfos, that they don't work today. He mentions the Maharil, that you should not use them because of this cherem. And he says also from the Kadmoinim, from the Geonim, that these are not necessarily considered to be divrei Torah that they're saying, even though there are those who say that even the statements of Chazal which they make in medical areas, etc., there's a pnimius to them. The Maharal's view is that there's a pnimius to them, and you have to understand it according to the pnimius. But even if you accept what the Maharal says, that still means that you cannot necessarily accept them as a medical cure and as a therapy, because really Chazal are just using those words to indicate some deeper inner meaning, but not the actual medical statement that they appear to be making. So again, I would also point out that there is such a thing as what is accepted and normal. How do we define, for example, hishtadlus? What's hishtadlus? Hishtadlus means making efforts, making appropriate efforts. So, for example, working. Okay, a person who doesn't make any arrangements for income whatsoever, and says, "I'll daven." So we know that that's called being soimech al hanes. There's a famous Igros Moshe who says that buying life insurance is normal hishtadlus. Why? Because to imagine that a person's entire parnasa will be replaced somehow, I don't know how, but it will be replaced somehow, he says that's relying on a nace. He says so, person has to have some type of, I don't know the details of what, I don't know anything about insurance. It's a term, life, I don't know what those mean. But I know what life means, but I just don't know what the other stuff means. But again, some type of insurance person has to have, just makes sense. Hishtadlus. So how do you define your obligation of hishtadlus? Okay, how far do you have to go? So there are different opinions about this, but basically, it depends a little bit on what's called nace and what's called teva. If the obligation of hishtadlus is you should not rely on a miracle, so therefore you've got to define miracle. So the Ramban, Rav Dessler says this, the miracle is that which happens infrequently. And teva is what happens all the time. So you define these things by what's normal, what's regular. So how do you define normal? That's rough, that's not so simple, right? When you ask someone, for a shidduch, is he normal? So, is she normal? Most people will probably say, yeah, right? Who's going to say, no, they're completely abnormal, right? Completely, right? So it's hard to define that, but what's accepted by people? So, for example, in the medical field, this I heard from a good friend of mine, Rabbi Akiva Tatz, who also is a Talmid Chacham, is also a doctor, and he asked Rabbi Yoshev, the specific question he asked Rabbi Yoshev was about vaccinations. And Rabbi Yoshev said, it's a chiyuv to vaccinate. And so Akiva Tatz asked him, but is that because you're putting other people at risk, other children at risk, etc.? Because as you probably know, there's no vaccine which is 100%. There are some people who it doesn't work for. So that means if there's someone who's not vaccinated at all and is carrying some type of disease, even a child who is vaccinated may contract it because it's not 100% effective. There are also people who could not get vaccines. For example, a child who's got a serious illness may not be able to vaccine. So that means the other child who is not ill and didn't get a vaccine because of misguided parents, so he's putting that other child at risk. So Akiva asked, is that the idea? Rabbi Yosef, that's part of it, but it's not only that. And this is what he said. It's not a word-for-word quote, but it's very, very close. He says, even if there is some danger in the vaccine, since that's the norm, it's an acceptable level of danger given the benefits of the vaccine. Now, given the benefits both for the individual and for the public of this activity, so even if we would say that there are some risks, which is not at all clear, but let's say, right, that there are risks, even so, right, that will be acceptable. So, for example, some say, the Rambam seems to imply, that's one of the reasons that the Roifer needs Reshus L'Rapos. Why does the doctor need permission? So some would say, because if HaKadosh Baruch Hu made the person sick, who are we to heal? The Rambam says that doesn't make sense. Rama says in Pirush Meshayis in Psochim, it doesn't make sense. He says, a person who says that, I would ask them the following question. Right? I would ask them, do you eat? What would they say? Of course I eat. You say, why? He says, if Hashem wants you to die of hunger, it won't help you to eat. And if he doesn't want you to die of hunger, you don't need to eat. So it's a great argument for not eating. Right? Is that a good argument? What's wrong with that argument? You go to the mechanic, and the mechanic says your brake pads are at 1%. And I say, so? He says, well, what do you mean, so? You're crazy to drive with brake pads at 1%. You're insane. You won't be able to stop. So what do you argue? You say, you, sir, are trying to rip me off. If HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants there to be an accident, there'll be an accident, even if you've got good brakes. If he doesn't want there to be an accident, even if you if he wants there to be an accident, even if you've got brakes, there'll be an accident. If he doesn't want there to be an accident, you don't need brakes. What's wrong with that reasoning? It sounds on the surface, but obviously we all get our brakes fixed, hopefully. We all eat, hopefully, right? I'm assuming, right? Right? We drink, etc., and we go to doctor. So the Rambam says, because HaKadosh Baruch Hu's decree is not, this will happen no matter what, and this will happen no matter what. His decree, his gezeira is, this will happen if you do X, Y, or Z. This will happen if you do A, B, or C. In other words, HaKadosh Baruch Hu's gezeira, it incorporates the fact that he's given us bechira, free will, and responsibility, and he expects us to do certain things. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu's gezeira is not black and white. This will happen no matter what this person does. This will happen no matter what that person does. It doesn't work like that. HaKadosh Baruch Hu says this will happen if this person doesn't act responsibly. Or this will happen if the person does. So it's conditional on human action. And therefore, you don't really need the Rishus to tell me that refuah is okay. That's the view of the Rambam. So why does the doctor need permission? So here the Rambam says, and he was a physician, he says because a lot of medicine causes negative side effects. It can cause you pain. No question, right? There are certain things. You get a refuah that might be painful. You take something for your headache and it messes up your stomach. You take something for your stomach and you can't sleep or whatever. I mean, there's always side effects. So how is the doctor allowed to hurt you in order to heal you? Nitna reshus l'roife l'rapois. There's a permission being given. There's a certain acceptable amount of pain and an acceptable amount of risk because the benefit is great. The end goal is wonderful. The end goal is great. I'll give you an extreme case of this. Extreme case of this is a Mishnah of Avodah Zarah, and this has a ramification regarding experimental treatments. Mishnah of Avodah Zarah says you're not allowed to go to a doctor who is an Oved Avodah Zarah. Now, I've got to be careful with terminology here. We're not talking about any non-Jew. We're talking about a doctor who's a dedicated pagan. You know what I mean? We don't have a lot of them around. Baruch Hashem, right? And of course, famously, Tosfos in the beginning of Avodah Zarah and in Bechoros, and the Ramah says that the average non-Jews amongst whom we dwell, whether they be Christians or Muslims certainly not Ovdei Avodah Zarah, although there may be other reasons to be wary, but, and Christians also, we don't consider them generally to be Ovdei Avodah Zarah. But if you had a doctor who's a genuine pagan, right, so in those days, he would be just as likely to kill you as heal you. You know, if for whatever reason it was a certain time of the month, or the time of the day, or he needed, he figured and a Jew walks in, he might be saying to himself, oh, excellent, looking for a korban, and here he is, right? So the Mishnah says, Loi ripui nefashos, you're not allowed to go to such a doctor if you're in danger of your life. Why? Well, clearly, because he might kill you. But then, it's interesting, the Gemara says the following. If, however, the person is definitely going to die if he doesn't go to this doctor. In other words, if he doesn't do anything, he'll only live a very short time, and he'll die very quickly. So he's allowed to go to such a doctor. What's the logic? The Gemara says, Chaye shor lo chashina. We don't worry about the short period of life. In other words, like this. I guess it's like game theory. If he doesn't go to any doctor, if he doesn't go to the doctor at all, he will die within a few months. If he goes to this doctor, the doctor, if circumstances are such that he's decided he'll heal you, he may be able to cure you, you'll live a normal lifespan. Or he may kill the guy straight off. So in other words, what's the risk? The risk is 6 months, let's say, of life. What's the possible gain? 50 years, a normal lifespan. So the Gemara says you're allowed to go to a doctor under those circumstances. So Tosfos asks, how can you tell me we don't worry about a few months of life? Harei la halacha, if a person is chas v'sholom buried under a building, earthquake, like they had yesterday in Italy, southern Italy, where I was last week, right? So they had an earthquake there. So someone's buried under a building. So it's Shabbos. You're allowed to uncover them. You're allowed to uncover them, whatever you need to do to save their life. What if we uncover them and the physician on site says this guy, he sees the guy is buried, he's not going to live for more than a few hours. He's not going to live for more than a few minutes. What's the halacha? Are you allowed to uncover him? You are correct. You are mechuyev to uncover him, even if he'll only live for a short time. The Meiri says because maybe in the few moments he'll do tshuva, in which case he'll gain olam haba. The Mishnah Berurah, Bira Halacha, says the Meiri is only saying that to make it easier for you to understand. But he says the truth is, even if the guy won't even regain consciousness, and he won't do tshuva, and he won't do any mitzvahs, and he'll just be alive for a few minutes, you're still mechuyev, you're still obligated to uncover him to save his life. That's very interesting. So Tosfos asks, so here we see in Hilchos Shabbos, Chayei Shor, meaning a short lifespan, we are indeed quite worried about it. And we will transgress Mechalel Shabbos to save a guy, even for a short, unconscious lifespan. And yet here, in terms of going to the pagan physician, who's likely to kill you as heal you, we say if the person's only got a few months to live, he can do this. So Tosfos answers, I'll quote his language because it's very, he says, Hacha v'hasam avdinan l'toivosoi. We always do it for the good of the patient. In other words, if the good of the patient will be served by ignoring Chayei Shor, the few months, because he may get the long normal lifespan, we'll ignore it. If the good of the patient will be ensured by not ignoring the short lifespan, i.e. digging him out of the building on Shabbos, then we don't ignore it. So Tosfos says, it's always, we do it for the good. So I want to point, and here, by the way, this Mishnah is brought as an evidence that sometimes if the person is only likely to live a short time, and there's an experimental treatment which will either cure him and give him a normal lifespan or kill him, he's allowed to take that experimental treatment. According to this Mishnah, that's because Chayei Shor, the short life, we don't. So what we see is there's a certain amount of risk that a person is allowed to take upon themselves. In the case, this is an extreme case, I'm just bringing it as an extreme case, but there's a certain risk he's allowed to take. Rabbi Yosef seemed to be saying, the way I heard it from Akiva Tatz, that the small risk is not only allowed to be taken, but it's obligatory because of the great benefits in the end result. So we sometimes ignore the risk because, and that's the idea. Nitna reshus l'roi l'rapos. Yeah, sure, the doctor could make a mistake, and sure, the doctor could cause you pain, and sure, and there might be side effects, but that's an acceptable risk factor for the ultimate goal of being healed. Now, one more point. I'm not automatically saying that all modern that doctors are all knowing, omnipotent, omniscient, etc. What I am saying, however, is the following: that we've had a lot of success in terms of modern medicine. Lifespans have increased tremendously over the past couple of 100 years. The ideas of hygiene, the idea of washing hands, the idea of keeping clean has eradicated and reduced a lot of major diseases. We have been able to, when I say we, I don't mean, me, I have nothing to do with medicine whatsoever aside from taking the occasion, right? But I mean, but humanity, because of the seichel that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave us, because of the gift of das that Hashem gave humanity, we've been able to do tremendous, tremendous things. Right? We can, a person who, and we know this in Hilchos Treifas, just for example, the Chazon Ish points out that there are there are treifas which people would have died from 100 years ago, which now doctors do to people in order to cure them. Right? A hole in certain organs will make someone treif. And yet, that's considered to be a necessary part of certain operations. So it's type of interesting. It's an amazing thing. So there are cures for so many things. So I think we have reason to believe, and nisayon and higayon, as the Rambam says, logic and higayon, that the standard medicine is effective. Am I saying it's the be all and end all? No. There certainly could be therapies that we don't know about yet, but the only difference is one's been proven, one hasn't. One has been tested, one hasn't. Once something gets tested and shown to make sense, al pi nisayon, even if I don't necessarily understand it, or I understand it, even though there's no nisayon yet, then it could be that's now just regular medicine. So I think we have to be careful on the one hand, as the Rashba says, Noichlei das ha'emes, we are the children of Yaakov, Ish emes, etc., and not to be taken in by claims and testimonials and something is ancient, something is from the East. Something from the East doesn't make it okay necessarily, right? Just okay, big deal. So it's from the East, right? There's a lot of negative things from the East as well, like fish sauce, right? So the fact that something is from the East or ancient or there's testimonials doesn't necessarily mean that we should follow it. And I think we should follow the advice of the Rashba, Chakira acha Chakira, the advice of the Rambam, that we have to have both higayon and nisayon, and what the Shulchan Aruch says, which is not advice, it's actually a halacha, that a person should not be oisek in this unless he is boki. V'lo yehei sham gadol mimenu. And Bekias is testable. It is testable. Right? Someone who's gone to 4 years of pre-med, and that's rough. It's not easy. I know this not because I've been to pre-med, but because I have students who are in pre-med. They're in stress for 4 years, right? Which medically speaking is not great for them. But okay, they'll be doctors, but whatever. And then goes to medical school and then does rounds in hospitals and learns from a resident and takes and participates in trials and so on and so forth. That's Bekias. That impresses me more than someone who goes to a 3-month course in Singapore. Singapore's a great place, but it's not, right? Or someone who reads a book about something and now is going to cure you. Very, very dangerous stuff. My brother-in-law lives in Australia. He's a oncologist and a neurologist, so he does a lot of neurological oncology. He had a patient who was responding to treatment for a while, and then the patient started showing some really strange signs. Turns out he was being poisoned. It wasn't by his wife or anything. No, he was being poisoned by a alternative therapist who was giving him, I forgot it was apricot pits maybe, which have in them what? Cyanide. He was getting cyanide poisoning because he believed that since it was apricot pits are natural and the therapy he was getting from my brother-in-law was not natural, so he was okay. So he's naturally having cyanide. And the unnatural drugs that he was getting from the doctor, right, were actually helping him, but he ended up, unfortunately, I think he passed away, but it was basically cyanide poison. So we have to be really, so it's A, sakonis ufoshus, something to be machmir in, and secondly, a lot of these alternative therapies, some of them at least, have their sources back in Darkei HaEmoiri and in Avodah Zarah, Chukosei Lo Sleichu, and these are areas in which we have to be extremely careful because Klal Yisrael, Kol HaMoideh, as I pointed out before, we're called Yehudim because a Yehudi is moide b'chol Torah kula, and that involves being kofer b'avodah zarah. And that's a little bit of an introduction to the topic. It's a lengthy topic. I mean, I'm not really qualified to speak about the medical aspects of it. I'm just barely qualified to speak about the halachic aspects. But I'm presenting makoros to you, and hopefully you'll take them and tein l'chacham v'yechkam od. Give it to a wise person, they'll become even wiser. Thank you for listening, and we'll, Be'ez Hashem, have a Shana Tova Masuka. I'll take some questions, yes. What about? Pigeons is a good question. That's an interesting one. For those who are not familiar with pigeons are birds, but in Israel there's a thing, people have hepatitis, so they take a pigeon and they put it on the navel of the patient, and the pigeon dies. Like now, I had hepatitis in Israel when I was a bocher in yeshiva. It was 1979, 80, I think it was. So I was going to a doctor. My roommate said, "Let's do the pigeons. Let's do the pigeons." So, okay, whatever. So what we did was we had a pigeon guy, and I had guys we have photographic evidence of it. We had them photographing it, and we had guys with stopwatches to time the death of the pigeons. I took a bilirubin test before and I took a bilirubin test afterwards. I can't say this was absolute scientific experiment, but it was pretty close. It made no effect on my bilirubin whatsoever, zero, right? And they died. I don't know. They seem to all take the same amount of time to die. On the other hand, at that same year, another friend who's in hospital, right, with hepatitis, they did the pigeons and he was cured. I don't know. This is anecdotal evidence. It's very difficult to define, and it's very, it's not in Chazal, right? It is old, but again said, old doesn't mean it's correct, and people do it. I don't think there's an Isser involved in this, right? Tsar Balei Chaim, the pain, we know that Tsar Balei Chaim, to cause pain to an animal, if it's for the benefit of a human, is okay. So there's no Isser in that. Bal Tashchis, it's not wanton destruction because you're doing it for a purpose. I don't think it has origins in Avodah Zarah, although I can't say for sure, but I don't think so. It is probably, at best, Darka HaEmoiri, which means would be okay if it actually shows Nisayon, if experience shows that it works. So I don't think it's Osir. I don't know if it's effective, but I don't think it's Osir. And, so that's as far as the pigeons go. Yeah. Yeah. Right.
Well, that's only a recent timeline. 100 years ago, the medical profession would take an entire profession and throw them in jail and call them quacks because they use nutrition as a form of healthcare. So that's changed all along the way.
That's correct. That's why I mentioned that as one of the spectrum of alternative. There's a whole spectrum of that.
And
right.
Second point, you indicated and gestured about a magnet, put it on some forehead, and made light of that.
Right.
Are you aware that the Federal Drug Administration, the FDA, has approved a product called transcranial stimulation, which is a magnetic field for people who have insomnia, people who have depression?
Well, again,
It's an approved drug, and
okay. All right. Let me just repeat. The first question, I'm not sure what the question was, but it pointed out that nutrition has changed. The acceptance of nutrition as being a therapy has changed over the years, and I don't disagree with that. Of course, as I mentioned, medicine has changed over the years and will probably continue to change. And I have no, I don't think it's not carved in stone. And if we have experimental evidence that something works, we accept it in the same way that nutrition has been accepted as a normal part of modern medicine, even though, as you pointed out correctly, it wasn't at one time. So fine. That's because logically we know it works now, number one. And number two, we have experimental evidence, which fits into the criteria of the Rambam without a problem. When it comes to magnets, again, the magnets that you buy in the dollar store or the Amazon, etc., those are completely ineffective. I don't know if the magnets you are talking about are different magnets or they may be much more powerful. If, again, I have no objection to it, what I object to is that the ones that you'll buy in the back of a magazine, the ones that will, so I don't think that they are anything, right? But, and I don't think the FDA has said that putting a magnet on your wrist will cure your arthritis. I don't think they've said that the little normal magnets you use to stick things on your notice board are going to be effective. I assume it's a very specific type of magnet, and I assume it's a very specific type of issue. Again, doesn't mean it's avodah zarah. Right? And it doesn't mean it's not Darkei HaEmoiri. Medicine, the only difference between what some people call Western medicine or modern medicine and alternative therapies is one, there's experimental evidence that seems to work, that shows that it works, the other doesn't. Right? So, no, I agreed. Sometimes it's only with time. Some things, even over time, I don't think we will concur. For example, there are tribes that I'm familiar with that will point the bone at people. That will. I don't think over time we're going to accumulate experimental evidence that pointing a bone at someone is going to cure them of cancer. I don't think so. Right? Maybe I'm wrong. Right? It could be I've been wrong. I was wrong in 1983 once. But it could be wrong. But again, there are certain things. It's not only with time. Some things with time will be shown to be effective, like nutrition. There are some things I really am skeptical that with time they'll become accepted, right? And as I said, there's a spectrum of these things, but we have to be really careful because there are certain things which are straight out of Avodah Zarah, certain things which are not Avodah Zarah, but they are certainly Darkei Ha'emoiri, and if they haven't yet been substantiated, they have not yet got the experimental evidence, and they don't make sense according to our simple logic of the current state of science, then I think there is reason to be machmir, and there is reason to be skeptical, and I think that's healthy skepticism. Yeah.
Just a super comment. Another word that people use, I have a question, is authentic. People use that as the word authentic.
Oh, authentic.
It's used to prove no matter what. Just using that word itself.
Right. Yeah. Which is a good point. Like I said, the fact that something's ancient or authentic or natural doesn't mean a thing. Yeah. Right.
However, I'm not sure whether you're aware of this, but very Hoshev Posek, who's no longer living here, and another Rabbi Abraham Kalumikratz itself, specifically wrote in almost every single year in his Pesach book certain alternative therapies that he disliked and thought they were part of Avodah Zarah. I'm sorry, but I don't remember.
Oh, interesting. I
mentioned Reiki, and I'm trying to think what else maybe.
Yeah, look, there are many poskim who've discussed these things and have come to that conclusion that a lot of these things have their origins in Avodah Zarah. And again, like I pointed out, that's one area we want to be machmir in. That's Yerei Shemaim Yachmir Latzvos of Avodah Zarah. And secondly, as I pointed out, merely finding a trace for this in Chazal is not sufficient, for the various reasons I mentioned, from the Goinim, Maharil, Yam Shel Shloima, and the Tosfos, and that's not enough to justify it. It's interesting to know that a Choshev Talmid Chacham like Rabbi Blumenkrantz has mentioned that. I wasn't familiar with it, but that's good to know. Okay, I think I think that's it for now, and I just want to. You have to also take into account, as Mark Twain once pointed out, a cold, if it's not treated, will go away after 7 days. If you treat it, it will go away after a week.
Doctors say the same thing about ear infections nowadays. Yeah. Okay. Yeshakar, Shem Yergin Shiratar, Mrs. Boston. It's going to be Yeshakar to Rabbi Becher for the very informative drasha. I would like to have the great schus of joining Yergin Shiratar in our Boston Satara work throughout the summer, throughout the year, worldwide. Call Yergin Shiratar 718-851-8651. Send an email, tapecenter@yeshivanet.com. Or I can meet you on the back table and with your credit card, and we can swipe it through the machine, or you can, if you're watching through the live stream, you can click on the donate box on the left side. Yashakach everyone for coming. Chananya ben Akashem, Rotzakadosh Baruch Hu Lazakeh, says Yisrael Afiker Hiblam Tar Mitzvah Shenem Ala Noich Hafez Aman Sidka Yagul Ter V'Yader.